Solo travel doesn't mean having to travel alone. Welcome to Vacation Mavens, the podcast that brings you travel inspiration and practical tips from two moms who know how to plan the perfect trip.
I'm Tamara from Your Time to Fly.
And I'm Kim from Stuffed Suitcase. With over 40 years of travel experience between us, we're here to share our favorite destinations from road trips to cruising, theme parks, and European adventures.
Whether you're planning a family vacation or a mom getaway, we have the tips and tricks to make memories that will last a lifetime. So we are back again with another guest. I hope you guys like that we're having some more guests, but this week I thought the topic was just perfect for this particular person. And today we're joined by Susan Heinrich. She is a Canadian writer, but living in Denver, Colorado, and she's passionate about travel and supporting women in tourism. In 2020, she created Midlife Globetrotter, that's when I first met her, a website and platform that helps women over 40 to follow their travel dreams to new places with destination guides, practical tips, and stories of her own adventures. Susan is passionate about reframing midlife as an opportunity, which I love also, and explores themes of reinvention and self-discovery in her work. So Susan, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hello. Thank you for having me, Kim and Tamara.
I was just thinking this is also a really good time for us to be talking about this because we're recording this right before International Women's Day, which is coming up on Saturday. So it's a good topic kind of for this season right now of the year.
I agree. And I feel like, Susan, I keep thinking like, oh, I first discovered you during COVID. And then it seems that was just last year, but then I realized that's 5 years ago.
5 years.
So
yeah.
5 years I've been following your journeys, and many times you're traveling solo and sometimes you're joining groups. And that's what I wanted to talk to you about today is we've had more and more interest. I know as I get to a certain season of my life, I'm more interested in group travel also. And by group travel, I think a lot of people think about those bus tours and, things that I would completely cringe over right now. But there are so many types of group travel experiences. And I know part of your story has been like the transformative experiences that you've had as part of group travel. So can you tell us a little bit about some of your early group travel experiences and what that's meant for you?
Yes. And it's interesting when you talk about the array of tours now. It's not just the bus tours that we think of from the 80s. And it seems every day there's a new company that either is offering tours for women only or a traditional company that's launching expeditions specifically for women. So tour operators are definitely seeing this interest and desire by women to go on group tours. I'd always loved to travel, but hadn't traveled as much when my children were young. And I had an opportunity to go on a group tour to India in 2017 with some friends of mine who were going to India for a wedding. And I was going to be away for almost 3 weeks. And my kids were still young teens at that time. So it was a huge deal for me to leave for that long, but I had always wanted to go to India. So I felt like I couldn't pass up the opportunity. And it was amazing. India is an incredible destination, obviously, but sharing that experience with a bunch of people that I didn't know who were all different ages. I think we were from 6 different countries. It was just incredibly invigorating and very different than going on a trip with your girlfriends or your partner, or obviously very different than going on a family trip, which was a lot of what I had been doing up until that point. And really sparked for me this appreciation for really a few aspects of it. But number one was the opportunity to share an experience with new people, as I mentioned, from all over the world. And number two was how great it is to have someone else take care of all the details and not have to worry about that yourself, which I know both of you know is a lot of work because you plan your own trip with your family. So yeah, there are a lot of things to love about a group tour.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's some definite benefits to it. So do you have any, for people who maybe aren't accustomed to the group tours, and as Tamara mentioned, they just have those large like coach buses with 40 or 50 people coming into the hotels together and stuff in their minds.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any tips for people that aren't familiar with this form of travel, like how to choose a good tour provider, what to look for?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll say, first of all, I truly believe now there is a tour pretty much for everyone. There are themed tours. There are, as we said, there are tours specifically for women. There are tours for people who love photography. There are tours for people who love architecture. It can take a little bit of digging, but there's an incredible array of tours available. I think one of the things that you want to think about is, what kind of experience do you want to have? Do you imagine yourself on a very relaxed sort of trip with lots of free time? Do you want to be on the go a lot. And that is, I call that pacing. And the way to figure out what's the pacing of a trip is to read the detailed day by day itinerary of any trip that you're seriously considering. And I know that sounds like a lot, and I'm not saying you need to do it with every trip you're glancing at, but those detailed itineraries will really give you a sense of what it will feel like to be on the trip. How often you change hotels. Are you going to be spending a lot of time on minibuses because buses are still a part of how you get from place to place? Are there activities planned from morning until evening, or do you have some free time? And I always recommend reading those detailed itineraries. Group size is another thing to consider. So traditionally, a lot of those group tours on buses were quite big. A lot of the tours offered now and the women only tours tend to be smaller. I personally prefer smaller trips, like under 14 people or so, because you
Yeah,
can stay in some more unique accommodations when you're a smaller group.
absolutely. Yeah.
And now there are certainly instances where certain ship expeditions, for example, where it's just going to be a larger trip, and that makes sense. But I do prefer the smaller group tours. Another thing to consider is if you're going on any sort of an active or adventure tour, is what is the challenge level of the trip? Because those kinds of trips vary a lot. I've actually looked at trips that I was seriously considering. And when I read the amount, I like to hike, I'm pretty active. But when I read the amount of hiking, I realized it was just really beyond what I wanted.
Yeah.
Especially the tour companies like Adventure Women that specialize and Adventures in Good Company that specialize in active travel, they very clearly lay out the different challenges of difficulty of their trips, their rating system for their trips and what to expect for each. So I think it's important to pay attention to that as well.
And I feel like that's coming. It's like when you go to all trails, right? And the ratings of a trail is whether you're a hiker or you're not a hiker. So you'll find like certain places you go to and you're like,
Yep.
I'm not sure that that's really easy. But for,
Yeah.
your typical outdoor, like very active person, it might be easy. So trying to
And
like that is
it's
interesting too.
tricky.
Yeah.
I've been on some cruises where they label things like moderate activity, and I'm like, this is not moderate, but inevitably there will be somebody who is not mobile or is not in shape, and they'll sign up for like a moderate to adventurous tour, and then everyone's stuck trying to make considerations for them. So I think that is a good aspect. I was
Well,
also going to say, I think it's hot for a lot of destinations. I was just at an Ireland event, and two of the tour companies there were announcing that they were starting 15 and 18 passenger tours, which could small group tours as opposed to the more like 30, 40, 50 people tours. So it is definitely a hot topic that people are looking for, I think.
one of
For
the other
sure. Yeah.
One of the other things that I've seen brought up, and I was talking to someone about this, is they were interested in a group tour. They were interested in the group tour with women, but they're like, she's been on one where it is like there's mother, daughter, or sisters, or friends, and she still felt like a little bit left out. And I've seen this new trend where it's solos. So it might be like
Yeah.
women solo. So you're more apt to find people that are traveling alone that you're then going to be able to connect with possibly more easily. I'd love to hear your experience with some of your group tours, Susan, because I find that generally people are going on that. They're going to be pretty open to being friendly and taking in new people. But what is your experience with that?
Mhm. Yeah, it's a good point. Of the tours that I've been on, it's been a real mix of solo travelers versus people who came with other women. And I've also been on group tours that were for anyone. So that some of those had couple. But my most recent group tour was with Adventure Women, and I went on a cruise of the Dalmatian coast. And it was really interesting. I think there were 14 of us. Two of the women came together. They were actually a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. Every other woman was a solo
Oh,
traveler.
wow.
Oh, that's
Wow.
neat.
So it was, yeah, I was really amazed. You always expect a few on each trip, but this was almost entirely solo women travelers. And we were mostly midlife women and older. So 40s, 50s, 60s. It was a fantastic group. I was surprised how quickly, given that really nobody knew each other, we all got comfortable with each other and friendships began to form because I think in this case, we were in the same boat. Literally, we were in a boat. But it is true that I think it's nice when you travel solo to have other women solo travelers who are interested in spending time together, doing things together. But for the most part, I think you're right. I think those kinds of trips attract people who are adventurous, who are willing to be a little out of their comfort zone. They know they're going to be with people they don't know. And that's sort of part of the adventure. But I did read that there are some new trips specifically all for solo travelers. And I thought that was interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah, I saw
that's
some
very cool.
from Road Scholar. I saw a press release about
Yes.
that just today. But I've seen it with others as well. So I think that's a neat trend.
One thing I was
Yeah.
going to advise is I've done two group trips. One was Oars, like a multi-day river rafting trip with my
Right.
family, and then another was an Adventures by Disney trip. And both of those providers said that you can always call in and ask, say, hey, I'm eyeing this tour. Do you know who? And they mainly do that because it's family oriented. And that way you can make sure, hey, I have two teens. Are there any other teens, or do you have an idea of the ages that are already booked on this tour? That way you don't end up with a bunch of 7-year-olds and then your teenager doesn't have anyone to hang out with. I'm guessing it might be a similar way as if you're really ready to book something, you could always check and call them and say, hey, I'm just wondering, are these mostly pairs or are there solos on this?
That's a great point. And I'm a huge calling the company with any questions at all. If you're not clear on the accommodation level, or if you're not clear on the itinerary or the activity level, if you really want to get a better understanding of how challenging it's going to be because it's not clearly laid out, I think it's always worth calling and having a clear understanding of it before you book anything. There's
Yeah.
one more thing I will add in terms
Yeah.
of what to look for, because this comes up a lot, and it's with regard to private rooms and single supplement.
Yeah.
And this is when you're a solo traveler, this is obviously an important issue. There are some tour operators who offer private rooms by default, and
Oh,
Girls Guide to the World is one, and Women Travel Abroad is another. So all of their trips are priced for private rooms by default. I think some of them, if you were traveling with a friend, you can possibly get a reduction because you're going to share a room. But those do exist, but that's the exception. Typically, grid tours are priced based on double occupancy. If you want your own room, you would pay what's called a single supplement. I think it's really important to understand how the single supplements work because they vary by company. And one example of this is G Adventures. That's actually the company that I went to India with. And they say in their marketing that they don't charge extra for you to have your own room. Now, the wording is that they don't charge a single supplement to solo travelers. That's what they say. But what you need to understand about that is that means that if you register as a solo traveler, if there's another solo traveler, woman of the same gender on that trip, they will pair you and you'll be roommates. However, if there isn't one, then you'll get your own room for no extra cost. But point being, it's not a guarantee that you'll have your own room unless you actually pay the single supplement for a private room. So I think it's really important to understand that when
Little
you're
yeah.
booking.
caveats.
I've
Yeah,
seen
that is
that. I
important.
was looking at a lot of different options recently for someone, and I saw some of them have the option. If you're willing to go into a roommate pool, then you don't have to pay the single supplement. And some will position it like you said. But if you want to guarantee your own room, then it's this
Yeah.
much. So it's another way of calling it that. And I've also seen such a big range in the single supplement from maybe only an initial $500 to $600 to a couple extra thousand. And so I think one of the tips that I would add is a lot of times, especially around things like this International Women's Day, things like that, you'll see sales for we're waiving the single supplement fee. So if you can jump on board when that happens, that can definitely save you some money.
Good
That's a
tips.
great.
Any other final tips you want to share? Maybe one or two
You know,
more?
it's useful to know what's included in the trip and what isn't. So reading through the inclusions in terms of things like airport transfers and meals and special activities. I always like to have a sense of who's guiding the trip. Is it a local guide in the country that I'm visiting, or is it an American guide affiliated with the company? Sometimes it's a combination of both. Even if the trip is being guided by someone from the US, for example, I always like to know that we're going to have some experiences with local guides on the
Yeah.
trip, maybe city tours and that kinds of things. And then, of course, the cancellation policy. Some of these group tour cancellations can be very restrictive. And so understanding what the policy is and buying insurance to protect you if you do need to cancel at the last minute.
Those are great tips. Yeah.
So I know group trips are not for everyone. I wonder if you can give some advice on trying to decide if it's your mode of travel or not.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think that if we're talking about private rooms, I think if you're hesitant at all, it's great to have a private room on your first group trip because it's nice to know that you have space to get away. The other thing that I think it's important for people to realize is I think so oftentimes the hesitation is that they're not going to have any time to themselves, that it's just going to be really busy. And I think that it's important to know that you can opt out of any activities that you want to at any time when you feel like you need a little more time to yourself, and don't go on a tour that morning and sleep in or read your book. So it is your trip. And to a large extent, you can create it the way that you want. So I'm a huge fan of them. I think anyone who is tempted to try it should, and maybe just have that private room and perhaps start out with a shorter trip. There's lots of group tours available in the US. So rather than investing in a really expensive 2-week trip overseas, if you're hesitant about it, try out a 4-day trip domestically. That is not as large of an investment, so you can get a feel for it. We can talk some more about some of those, but yeah, so maybe dipping your toe in with a shorter trip.
I think that point about that you can opt out is so important. And I think Kim can relate to this. Like, she and I have gone on so many press trips where you have to do everything. And
That's
sometimes
true.
there are those people on a group press trip. There's always one kind of thing
There's
that,
always one.
yeah, you're trying to maybe get away from. So whenever there's group dynamics, there might be someone that you don't gel with quite as much. But just the idea of giving yourself the grace to opt out and making it, I always tell people, like, this is your vacation. Even if you've booked it, if you don't feel like it that day, you can, maybe you still have to pay for it, but you can cancel. I mean, it's good to give yourself that out if you need it.
Are there,
Absolutely.
are there any other like cons that stand out to you that maybe it's okay, you want maybe your own space, your own mental capacity, maybe you're worried about the dynamics. My husband would never want to be on a group trip because the idea of being around people all the time it's not a vacation to him. Can you think of any other things that people that you would say, if you are this way, or if you have this concept, or if you enjoy this style of vacation, group trips might not be for you? Are there any special things like that?
Sitting on a beach.
Yeah, exactly. People who want like group trips are not necessarily the most relaxing trips, right? They're typically quite busy, and the itineraries are busy because you're paying to see as much as possible and experience a lot. So yeah, people who want a really relaxing beach vacation, that's not the kind of trip that it is. I think people who just want to have more freedom and flexibility to spend more time in one place versus not, and really don't like being scheduled at all on a trip, it's probably not for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense. I think
Mhm.
that's all very valid. And I also, something you said early on that stuck out to me was who is your tour guide? Because I never considered that if you are going on an international trip, are you going to have someone leading that's in the local community, or are you just going with some person who doesn't know the area at all?
Absolutely. And I'll segue back to my trip to India. Our guide on that trip, who was an Indian guy, was absolutely phenomenal. And he made that trip. I can't
Yeah.
imagine doing that trip with an American trip leader, no matter how knowledgeable they were of India and the culture and spoke Hindi or whatever. We just were constantly peppering him with questions about what does that mean and why do they do it that way? And he just knew everything. When we were
Yeah.
served our meals, typically you can't have ice in India unless you're in a very expensive hotel because the water can be contaminated. As the waiters were serving us our drinks and things, he would be always watching to make sure they weren't giving us something that wasn't safe. I was served a lime soda once and it had ice in it. And before I could even pick it up, he was swooping in and taking it and sending it back. Depending where you're going, it enriches a trip so much, I think, to have a local guide.
Absolutely.
I think G Adventures does a really good job from when I've talked to them in making sure that they're not only utilizing people from the community, but that they're giving back to the community as well, which I think is something to think about. So that kind of leads me into the next question, and I'm sorry to just jump in, but what are some of the companies that you've looked at that you would maybe recommend people taking a look at? We've mentioned a couple already, but I know that there's so many, as you mentioned.
Yeah. So I mentioned G Adventures, and I think they do now have their tours have always been for anyone, and they have typically organized them by level of accommodation and age. So they have some tours for 18 to 30-year-olds, for example, but I think they're now offering some tours for women. What I like about them is they are budget friendly. Another company for someone who's on a budget is Australia-based Intrepid Travel.
Intrepid,
And
yeah.
they've recently launched women's expeditions. and to some really interesting places. So if
I've
you are
looked at
more,
Intrepid, but I like nicer accommodations. So I'm like, darn.
yeah. So, and yes, Intrepid is definitely not a luxury travel
Yeah.
company. They're traditionally their audience is younger, so they're more
Yeah.
economical, but budget friendly
Backpackers.
trips. Exactly. But they do have, I think, probably a wider range of trips than you might realize. And they launched maybe 2 years ago or 3 years ago, women's expeditions to some really amazing places like India, Turkey, Nepal, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan. And the idea with these trips is it's really about cultural immersion because the guests are women only. They're able to take them into places with local women and to interact with them and
Oh,
have
yeah.
really grassroots experiences that wouldn't be available to a group that included men just because of the cultural
Yep.
restriction. They're a budget friendly option. And on the other end of the spectrum, if you want a luxury trip, I know Tamara, you're familiar with this company as well, Girl Guide to the World. I mentioned earlier on that they're one of the companies that guarantee a private room. They are typically only staying at 5-star accommodation. And they started out as a company that focused on France because the founder has a home in Paris and Bordeaux, although she's American. So they have great expertise in France if you're interested in that. But in recent years, they've broadened out into all over the world. So that's a great option for luxury. For anyone who's interested in nature and wildlife trips, there's a company based in Colorado called Natural Habitat Adventures. I have not traveled with them yet, but they are totally on my bucket list because they are known for, they're actually partnered with the World Wildlife Federation and they're
Hmm.
known for their wildlife trip. And
My girls would be
excuse
all
me.
over that.
Yeah. And they're another example of a company that their trips have traditionally been for everyone, but recently they launched a subset of women's, specifically women's expeditions. And I think they have them to 20 different destinations now. So things like obviously safaris in Africa, they have trips to the Arctic to see polar bears, Alaska adventures. They go to Peru, and they also have a women's expedition in the US to Yellowstone and Grand Teton to see the wildlife there. So yeah, lots of great options with them if you're interested in wildlife. I mentioned that I traveled with Adventure Women to Croatia. They were actually one of the earliest in the US to get into women's only tours in 1982. A woman named
Wow.
Susan Eckert founded them. Yeah. So they have quite a long history and they do a really great job. I would say they're upscale, not as luxury as Women's Guide to the World. Their accommodation is typically 4-star. I had a great experience with them in Croatia, so I would definitely recommend them. Now, they are active adventures. So all of their trips have some element of activity, but in Croatia, they do have some trips that's very moderate. So for in Croatia, we did walking tours and we did one day of cycling, which was optional. It can be a lot of this is soft adventure, it's called. So I would say to people, don't be put off if the name of the company has adventure in it, because many of these tours are soft adventure and would appeal to a lot of different women.
Yeah, and there's all, like you said, there's all sorts of adventure. Like I know one company that's really well known for their cycling tours is Backroads, and they
Backroads,
just
yeah.
introduced some women-only tours. But I noticed that those were more hiking. So definitely, if you're interested in hiking, or even if you're interested in certain destinations, like I've come across in Iceland, there's Viking women. So if there's
Yeah.
some that are very specialized, and that's run by a local Icelandic woman. And so there you're getting that local
Look.
guide as well as supporting like local economy. So that
Yeah.
I really like. And Kim, just another one that I've run across recently, just on that upscale 4 to 5 star,
Yep.
is Insight Vacations, which they're a
Mm,
pretty big tour company. But they've also introduced some group trips just for women, and some of them are
Yeah.
also like walking, like gentle walking trips, or all types of other like cultural trips. So yeah,
Nice.
so many options.
I did
so
notice
many
that
options.
a lot of these, like I know Backroads also does have like teen focused trips like this as well, since that's some of our
Mhm.
audience might be in that phase. And they have ones where you can split it up, like you're only cycling some days and you're hiking other days, and they mix it up. So I think what you said early on about like really looking at the itinerary and what the level of adventure is for each one, because I think a lot of people like to stay a little active on a vacation. But if that is not what you want, you definitely want to make sure you're booking with a tour operator
Yeah.
that is not an active adventure style.
And I can see
Absolutely.
there's probably a lot of demand for the adventure type of things because you think I like to hike, but I don't have any friends that do. So I want to go do that with someone else. Or I know even when I did my walking trip across England, people are like, "You're doing it by yourself? I'd be too scared." And so there's that element of just being nervous about doing something more adventure related on your own. So it's like a
Yeah.
nice way to do that.
For
Yeah.
sure. And speaking of nerves, I think that is a great point. There's lots of reasons people might be hesitant to do something like this. And I would go back to the point that whatever your hesitation is, some company has already thought of this and figured out how to make it work for you. One example is a company called Adventures in Good Company. They're actually based here in Fort Collins, Colorado. And they do a lot of active adventure trips in the US as well as some international trips. But one of the things that they do is what is called slack packing. So Tamara, I think that's similar to what you did in England, where
Hmm.
it's a hiking trip, but you have someone else transporting your bags. So you're
Yeah.
only actually with slack packing, you're only actually carrying your day pack and the company is moving your backpack. So you get that backcountry experience, but without having to carry a heavy pack, which I would be completely all in for.
Yeah.
That is
Just,
Tamara knows. Yeah, that's my dream right now. That's my next big
yeah.
trip. I'm doing a solo trip. I haven't picked the country yet, but I had been looking at, I believe it's Max Adventure was
Oh,
the
yeah.
group I was looking at booking through that does they transport your luggage for you. And they're not group style, of course, but
Right.
they help transfer that luggage for you and set up your hotels along the way and give you the calendar of how far you have to walk each time.
Ah,
Yeah.
it's fantastic. It makes it so much more enjoyable. And you
Yeah.
mentioned Backroads, and I was actually looking at their website a little earlier, and I was interested to see that a lot of their trips can accommodate a variety of activity levels. So they'll have a trip that says whatever it is, hiking in France or Switzerland, I think it was maybe, and it was from levels 1 to 3. And each day you have an option of a level 1, 2, or 3
Oh,
hikes so
nice.
that you could go with a friend, both be at different hiking levels and still experience the same trip. So again, like
That's awesome.
the companies have come a
Figured it
long
out.
way in figuring out how to make
Yeah.
these work for as many different people as possible.
Absolutely.
Yeah. By the time you hear this, I probably will either be back from Peru or in Peru.
Yeah.
But that's the type of thing where Hannah and I are doing this lodge to lodge trek in the Sacred
Right.
Valley. But you're hiking, but your luggage is, well, they give you a duffel bag. So we'll see how well I do packing with in just the duffel bag. But that's being moved for you. But there's also an option. So if you don't want to do this hike, you can go visit a women's weaving cooperative or visit this
Mhm.
archaeological site. Or so there's options like that, which
Yeah,
is
and then they just have
great.
a bus that
Yeah.
takes you to the next
Yeah.
point. That's awesome.
There's one other one I wanted to mention that I saw recently, which kind of surprised me. But for those that are interested in river cruising, I saw that Uniworld actually is just introduced their first women's only river cruise.
Oh,
You know,
interesting. That's
there's, and
cool.
like we said, pretty much every company out there is, oh, women are spending money in travel and they like to
Yeah,
travel in
exactly.
groups or
Nice.
alone.
I thought that was so interesting. You actually pointed that out to me. So I checked it out and the price is really good too. They seem to have lowered the price. That might be, it's in, yes, in southern France, I think the Rhone and Somme rivers, and it looks fantastic. So
Very nice.
I think that would be a great experience.
Another group tour that I think is a fun idea, and I believe it's women only. I don't know if it's just naturally led that way or if it's run that way, but our friend Vanessa Tamara, she runs the British Book Club tour. And she runs those like once or twice a year, and they go all around parts of England. I'm always a big fan of when they do the Jane Austen. They do outfit photography sessions and have tea, and they have the little parasols, and they go around and do a lot of that stuff. So she has another one of those. I think it might be full, but I think she has another one coming up in September. But that's unique. And I think there's a lot of those that are like the themed, like you mentioned, themed tours and stuff. So wanted to
Yeah.
give a shout out to that one.
It's something that I
Oh,
keep
that's,
thinking about doing with sister and my niece and my daughter sometime in the future. Would be
Yeah.
really fun.
So fun.
that sounds really fun. I would love that.
For
Yeah.
everyone listening, you can pop over to vacationmavens.com when you get online, and we're going to have a list of some of these tour groups there for you. So you can easily, if you're not able to write it down, you can go back and look over all that. So I think that covers quite a bit, and hopefully it's going to be really helpful for our listeners. But before we sign off, I know that you actually have kind of a fun trip you're putting together coming up. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that and then close out with where all of our listeners can find you online?
Oh, yes. I'm co hosting a trip for the very first time. So this is a new adventure for me. Paris is my favorite city, and I've spent a fair bit of time there. And so I'm co hosting a trip to Paris in April with an art historian named Julia Bernardini. And so it's an art history tour for women, and we have 12 women signed up to join us on that tour. And I'm really excited to be on the other end of organizing and hosting and just helping to make sure that everyone has a fantastic time. And it reminds me all that goes into planning one of these tours. So it makes me appreciate them
Absolutely.
all over again. But yeah, so I am really looking forward to that. It wasn't just something I had intended to get into organizing a group tour, but this opportunity with Julia came up. So I decided to do it. So that will be fun.
Nice.
So, Susan, can you remind everyone where they can find you online?
Yes. So I have a website called Midlife Globetrotter, and that's at midlifeglobetrotter.com. And you can find more about women's tours. I have a curated list of women's tours at different price points and different kind of trips. And then on social media, I am on Instagram at midlife.globetrotter. And I'm also on Pinterest at Midlife Globetrotter. So those are places to find me.
That's great. And just if anyone that loves Paris, anyone that loves France needs to follow her. And anyone, I will also just shout out anyone that likes someone that travels with impeccable style, because I always love your style. And she does amazing capsule wardrobes. And yeah,
Oh,
so
I definitely need to be following that because
yeah,
that is
that
where I need help.
That's very sweet. I started doing capsule wardrobes because I really struggle with packing. And so every time I was going through that process and shared it, people are like, "Oh," but ironically for me, it never seems to get easier no matter how many capsule wardrobes. I struggle with it every time. But yes, thank you very much. And thank you for
Nice.
having me. It's such fun to have a chance to actually be part of the podcast after listening to so many of your episodes.
thank you. It was
You're a
great to
wealth of
chat with you
knowledge,
in
so thank
person.
you.
If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe and rate and review on your favorite podcast app, as that helps other people discover us. And if you want to see more, follow me, Tamara, at Your Time to Fly on Instagram and Facebook and all the others.
And you can follow me, Kim, at Stuff Suitcase on Instagram, Facebook, and of course, my blog.